I'm Jeff Helfrich, State Representative for House District 52. Life's messy, government's messier. When I was on the street, I got to see what worked and what didn't work. And in Salem, I see a lot of things that aren't working. I want to cut through that red tape, get to simpler government, and get to stuff that works for you. Here's our next episode. That's perfect, right? Welcome back to Basics. John, I want to say thanks for being on my show. I really appreciate it. It's going to be really good. You spoke at another event that I was at a couple weeks ago and just super excited.
It'll be fun. Looking forward to it.
Look, all right. So I give everybody an introduction. I want to make sure I get your bio right. And so if I mess something up, please step in. That's not correct. I really appreciate it. All right, here we go. John is the Senior Vice President at DHM Research in Portland. I have his bio right. I'm looking at it right now so I don't mess it up. He grew up in rural Minnesota near Detroit Lake, spending his childhood at a local bowling center. He attended the University of Nebraska, go Big Red, on a bowling scholarship, later earning a sociology degree from the University of Minnesota. Moving to Portland in 2003, he worked at OHSU managing ADH Research before joining DHM Research in 2010. Where he now leads political research and has moderated over 500 focus groups across Oregon. John, you've been polling Oregonians for a decade, giving us a clear picture on what is on the mind of people that live here, from Portland to Pendleton, from the northern border to the southern border. And I want to dig into what you see voters are saying and what we as leaders in the state, whether it's in the Senate or the House or general leaders in small government or large government, what we need to listen to and what you have seen from your research.
Well, sure. I mean, there's lots of things we could explore here. Two that jump to top of mind. First, we've been in a long period of declining sentiment about the state, about local communities, about the country.
Right.
I say that a bit because to remind folks listening, like this is a time of negativity. And it's a time that's really different from the historical norm. So just the classic question the pollsters ask, are things heading in the right direction? Are they off on the wrong track? In the late 1990s, early 2000s, you would get 65% of Oregonians consistently say that things were heading in the right direction. Now we're about 35%. And what is driving that negativity? There's been ups and downs with the economy for sure. Oregon is a Democratic state. We've had some Republican administrations, and so there's a little bit of just sort of that sentiment that happens in a place like Oregon. But the driving issue is really around homelessness. And homelessness touches housing costs, it touches crime, it touches people's concerns about mental health. But now we ask Oregonians, tell us what's the most important issue facing the state today. You get 45% of folks say homelessness. Even at the height of the Great Recession, at that time, only about 20% of people were saying the economy was the most important problem. Just to give you an idea of how intense the concern is around homelessness is just that difference between even when we had 8, 9, 10% unemployment, it's twice as many people are saying homelessness as we're saying the economy at, compared to say 2008, 2009.
Really? Okay. And you touched in a little bit about crime. I think the statistics showed, it was at 20% versus 53% for homelessness in the last research you talked about. Do you do the follow-up questions? Is it about just the tents out there, or is it just in general when they say homelessness? Have you broke it down beyond that?
For sure. And so first of all, I'd say, to you of a statewide audience, when I say homelessness is Oregon's most important concern, that is true in Portland. It is true in Washington County. It is true in Medford and in Bend and along the coast. You pick your community in Oregon.
Hood River,
right? We just Albany. It's not just an urban issue. When I sit down at a focus group table and talk to people about homelessness, the images that come to mind are unsanctioned camping, tents, but then the associated sort of disorder with that too, whether it is petty crime or open air drug use. Now, I'm not the expert on homelessness. That's not, I'm not the policymaker. I'm not the expert. And I think, I tell experts this, I get some pushback and say, well, you're not thinking about, or they are not thinking about, people who are living short term in a hotel or couch surfing with a friend.
Right.
And it's true. But the concerns that the people have and the image people have is really that just disorder and chaos that they see on the street, particularly with unsanctioned camping and mental health and drug use that's associated with that.
So I've always had the philosophy that government should focus on the essential safe communities, providing an environment for the economy to grow and kind of get out of the way of private sector and less regulations. Do you have any research or any conversations about what Oregonians think about that type of basic governance and government stance and where your thoughts are at on that?
Well, sure. If you ask, well, let's say this. Oregonians hold many values in their heads at the same time. Often they conflict with each other.
Right.
So certainly if you ask an Oregonian, like, should government be efficient and should regulations be lower rather than higher? They're going to say, yeah. But that often runs up against other values that they have. For example, who do you think is paying their fair share of taxes? Or who do you trust to make decisions? Or are large corporations unfairly profiting and due to their corporate greed? I mean, these are sorts of things that they might also hold. And so it's like, where do these run up against each other? You can see right now with voting patterns in Oregon, sort of those, I'll say those left-leaning, those liberal, more democratic concerns are ascendant in the state right now, rather than maybe those, more right or conservative concerns about low regulations, efficiency, freedom, things like that.
Right. Yeah. That what that sounds like is, Oregonians want, housing or homelessness, housing and safe communities. Those are kind of the top tier things that we talk about. And that's kind of my push with my back to basics approach.
Yeah.
Like, we have to get back to these basics to get these things done. And that's, what you've said there is that's what I'm committed to. And we got to figure out how do we get everybody else on that same track and swimming in the same direction.
Not to make it too much about homelessness, but just to give an example of why these problems are difficult to solve and why I can tell you that, by far the most important issue in Oregon among Oregonians is homelessness, but they're not on the same page necessarily what they want done about it. And you can ask these sorts of questions in lots of different ways, but if we ask Oregonians, what do they think is the root cause of homelessness? Is it mostly mental health and drug addiction, or is it lack of affordable places to live? Well, among all Oregonians, it's definitely on the mental illness, drug addiction side. Within the Portland metro area, it's getting closer to sort of a 50-50 proposition. But among Democrats, and, we have close partisan primary elections, and we have, Democratic leadership and the governor and the legislature.
All three branches.
Right. Among Democrats, they think it's lack of affordable places to live. And so you can take the average of Oregonians and say that they're fall on one side or the other, but just the way that the politics and the elections line up in the state, policy can be delivered from what a minority perspective might be.
Right. So you touched on homelessness and then housing. And, one of the things I'm focused on with my back to basics for Oregon is specifically public safety. I think that's a big thing. There's a driver there, and that touches so much of those issues that we discussed. I led the charge when I was House Republican leader on reforming Measure 110 and recriminalizing drugs. And you and I had that discussion, I think at OBI. You gave a presentation at the Salem Convention Center a little bit. Hey, let's talk a little bit more about that, because I think that was more important. But do you think the correlation people see with housing and drugs, they see that in your polling, or is that just two different separate issues with drugs and crime?
They relate. They're not like the Venn diagram. There's not a perfect overlap either. Right. Housing is complicated. I mean, if you we could say a lot
about housing and homelessness. It is complicated. Yeah.
Some of the things that jump out to mind about housing, for one thing, is you see really big differences by age. Younger people in particular are especially anxious about housing. Now that makes sense. They're much more likely to be renters. They're down payment is a lot more now for today's young generation than it was for young generations in the past, and that's real stressful for them. So when they say housing, they're thinking a lot about their monthly expenses. No doubt people, even if you think that homelessness, the root cause of homelessness is mostly mental illness and drug addiction, that's because I forced you to make that choice in that survey question. It doesn't mean that those people are saying that housing doesn't play any role in it. Right? I mean, I do think that even those who say it's mostly mental health and drug addiction acknowledge that rising housing costs are going to put pressure on people to be able to stay in their homes, and that's going to have an effect on the number of people who end up on the street.
So a takeaway for leaders like myself and others, how can we use your research to help drive our policy decisions, do you think?
So I'll give you two answers that maybe are in direct contrast to each other, which is going to be frustrating. So I think that elected leaders should be sensitive to where public opinion is at, right? Their job is to not everybody can serve in the legislature. And so they have a responsibility to reflect the values and the concerns and the priorities of everyday people. Of course, that's the responsibility. it's also the responsibility of elected leaders and parties to win elections.
Right.
Right? I mean, they got to win elections.
Yes, you do.
And you don't get to enact your policies unless you're in power. At the same time, public opinion is not fixed. Public opinion can be moved.
Right.
What elected leaders, what politicians, what sort of those in power can do is set the agenda about what is the conversation, what is sort of the focus of what the political debate is about. And so back to your point about sort of, low regulations and sort of efficiency, like it's incumbent upon politicians who believe that to make that central to what the debate is about.
Right.
Right. Because a broad majority of Oregonians will say that is an important thing.
Yeah.
If that is what the argument is about. And so you should, I think, look at public opinion to figure out sort of what set of values and concerns that people have, what sort of policies you have that can help improve them. But also look at them and say, all right, the public is focused on X. I'm concerned about Y. What can I do, say, to put my concern, my why, at the center of the conversation, to be able to move where that conversation is at. Otherwise, we get fixed in sort of in the status quo, and policy doesn't sort of move in a direction that maybe, say, Republicans in Oregon would like it to move. Yeah.
So kind of walk back to 2000 or in 4002, took a different approach. We produced what I believe was a really good bill in our bill and published it. And there was some, internally as leader, you're managing the caucus and you're managing everything, and you're trying to everybody's input and pushing it forward, and took the direction that we put our bill out first. And we said to our colleagues across the aisle, to the Democrats, here's where we're at. You need to come to the table too. And they were having these sidebar conversations and things like that. I think that showed, for me, the electorate, to anybody that's listening in politics, like, wow, here's their idea. Mm-hmm. Here's their idea. And then the machine kicks in, each PR machine kicks in, all these things like that, and drives that conversation certain ways. And so going back to the election cycle last year, we defined what we thought were the issues based upon research and polling. Mm-hmm. But all of a sudden, the seats that we're trying to pick up, that same person that we're trying to get that seat from, insert whichever district it was, they all of a sudden started to sound like Republicans again. It was funny.
But that's not bad for you, is it? If they're talking like, maybe that helps them win their election.
Yeah, it helped them win their election, right? But we're back to the same old politics.
But if they're going to, I hear what you're saying. Yeah. You want to win your elections. You want to own that issue, not have them take it from you.
Yeah.
And I'd say, well, if you move them towards your position, maybe the long term is helpful. Helpful too.
So your polling has shown a divide from the urban and rural.
Tremendous
divide. And like Malheur County's younger demographic differs from Curry County's, which is an older one. How do we as leaders serve that gap and bridge that to make sure whether it's Democrat or Republican, whoever it is, but how do we respond to those different demographics? Because you have a younger crowd and an older crowd.
I'm really glad that you're bringing this up. It's probably one of the most underappreciated things about Oregon's political geography. We think of urban, rural, and I think a lot of times we say this as though the urban is one thing and rural is another. But if you look at our most racially diverse counties in the state, there are places like Malheur County and Morrow County and Hood River County. And those places, Hood River, so set that aside, but Morrow and Malheur, Jefferson, these are places that vote Republican. But so does Curry. And Curry is definitely not one of the most racially diverse counties in the state. Curry County is also quite old. It's the median age in Curry County is about twice as it is, say, in Umatilla County.
What's that
Not
number?
maybe about 20 years older. But it's really.
What's the number?
It's mid 50s versus I don't know, around 30, something like that.
Easy, I'm 57 now.
That's all right.
I know, I get it.
But you say that, and I'm sort of reinforcing that, these are different places. Mm-hmm. The places that Curry County is interesting because you have a lot of Californians who move up and retire there, right? That's a retirement community. Sort of the demographic profile of those retirees is, say, different than maybe in Deschutes County and Bend, but that's a lot of what's happening there. And then you have these rural counties, particularly in Eastern Oregon, that have these large, largely Hispanic populations, and they're not a majority in those counties yet, but the under 18 population could well be, I don't have those numbers in front of me, but it's going to be approaching that in some places. If I were looking at sort of the broader demographics of American politics, we saw some pullback among Hispanic voters towards Republican Party this election cycle, but the general trend is more Democratic than is Republican.
Right.
I would really be looking at those places and thinking, all right, how do we hang on to those voters? What are their concerns and interests? What is the concern and interest of someone who is perhaps a first or second generation immigrant who's been an agricultural worker? And what's the Republican message to them in a way that is going to also be compelling to retiree in Curry County? And there may be choices to make.
Right.
There may not be. It may be that you have to sacrifice one part of the coalition in order to gain an ascendant or a growing population. I don't have the great answer for you.
Right.
Just to acknowledge that those are demographic trends that are coming, and they're going to have to be wrestled with.
Yeah, no, it's just kind of what you touched on is kind of what I'm trying to do. Again, back to basics, that leadership and the basics with housing, homelessness, and the crime and the safe streets, because I think that matters to people. If you have those cornerstones, then you can build out from there. I spent 30 years serving in this state, and I was in the Air Force 4 years, 7 countries, a conflict and a war, police sergeant. Now I'm a legislator. I never dreamed I was going to be in the legislative body, sitting on the farm back in Nebraska.
Pretty good career, though.
It's definitely been a wild ride, and I've enjoyed every step of it. Just take that opportunity to step through that door and go, hey, what's this next adventure got? What's your story? Going from bowling in Minnesota to Portland. Let's talk about that.
Sure. So,
excuse me, top pollster in Oregon. We'll give you that credit. Yeah.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I'll try to. My mentors, Adam Davis and Tim Hibbets, the D and the H of DHM. Those are the top pollsters. I only hope to I just hope to live up to make them proud. One of 6 kids. My parents my mom was a teacher her whole career, middle school social studies teacher. My dad did different things. He taught for a while. He went to law school, got a law degree, hung up a shingle for a while, started a couple businesses, got into software. At the end of his career, sort of post teaching, my dad got very active with the NRA and guns, and he traveled all over the country teaching gun classes to get people licensed. So my dad was very entrepreneurial throughout his career. My parents were not political. I mean, they voted. They would talk about elections when they came, but politics were not a dinner table conversation
not
at all.
Front of the center, right? Yeah.
In the course of growing up, one of my dad's businesses went through a difficult time, and when it was flush, we had a home in Minneapolis and a lake property up in northern Minnesota. And when my dad's business struggled, they put both on the market because they couldn't afford them both and had to choose one. And it was during a recession, and the place in the city sold before the vacation property, essentially, which is we would expect. But that meant that for my high school years, my mom stayed in Minneapolis during the week and taught. She slept on the floor of her sister's apartment, and then would travel home on the weekends to be with us kids. And then Dad was more or less. My dad passed recently. I'm not sure if he would feel okay with me saying he was a stay-at-home dad because he did other things, but he was largely sort of stay-at-home dad. And we struggled. It was a hard days. You know what it's like to have lots of cereal for dinner. One thing that we had when we moved to Detroit Lakes, my dad was a very good bowler. He was not a successful professional bowler, but he bowled on the tour. And when we moved to small town,
do you have that big collared shirt walking out, those bell-bottom jeans? Yeah, all right.
We went to small town. One of the activities I got involved with was bowling, and I asked Elaine if I could, the bowling center proprietor, if I could help coach the kids for after-school league, and they said yes, and that became then sort of a job. And I worked at the bowl all the time. I mean, I was at the bowl all the time. My closest friends were, the 50-year-old guy who bowled league, and then we would bowl for money after league, and show group and that. I traveled the state of Minnesota, bowling tournaments, junior tournaments, and then I had an opportunity to go to Nebraska where they have a good bowling program. But bowling centers are just like it's not my life now, but it was very much my home growing up, and hanging out with everyday folks in a small town.
It was blue collar. It was
blue collar town.
Blue collar, right? Yeah.
That is where I'm most comfortable. Yeah.
That's like when I go back to visit back in Nebraska, same thing.
Yeah.
So, side note, when I went to Columbine High School. I graduated there in outside of Denver in Littleton. And one of the classes you could have my senior year was you could take bowling. Yeah. So 2 days a week, got up, did bowling for 2 days a week, and then the rest of the day got to sleep in and then go through. And it was fun.
At the risk of talking about too much Husker stuff, when I was at the University of Nebraska, I taught the bowling class there.
Nice.
And one of my students was Jay Sims. James was not the best running back at Nebraska, but he was one of the better running backs, sort of that era. Jay Sims, he was a big running back for the University of Nebraska. The guy loved to bowl, but I couldn't get him to throw anything more than a 12-pound ball.
Oh, University of Nebraska. They got a good bowling team, baseball team, their football teams. Yeah, they're a volleyball school now.
They're volleyball school now.
Yeah. You have been deeply involved in civic life here in Oregon. You serve as president of the City Club of Portland and then chairing the Healthy Democracy. Mm-hmm. How has that shaped your understanding of what Oregonians want to see in their leaders? Or has it? I mean,
it has. I thought you were going to ask a slightly different, or at least there's a slightly different question in my head, which I'm sort of ready to jump on. So for just part of my, just real quickly, as quick aside, like part of my origin story to be a pollster is I met Adam Davis, again, the D of DHM. We both served in the board of directors at the City Club at the same time. Mm-hmm. So to young people who are listening to this podcast, if you want to get involved with, move up in life, raise your hand, be willing to do stuff. And when a person of senior leadership takes an interest in you, respond in kind. There'll be opportunities that come, and that certainly was certainly my case. Both these organizations help everyday people engage in public policy. They do it through different ways. City Club is a membership organization. Low bar, anybody can be a member.
It's like a Rotary Club.
Kind of like different sort of missions or projects, but yes, anybody could sort of be a member, and we find activities for people to be engaged in. Healthy Democracy is different, where we take public policy issues and then we randomly recruit people throughout a community to study them for a time. So you don't even have to know that Healthy Democracy even exists. We might come find you and randomly recruit you and give you an opportunity, and you pay some money and give you some time and resources to be able to do it. I think with both of them, they've changed my perspective over the years of just how policy is shaped and made. I really think that both those organizations do a great job of helping individuals learn about policy, build skills about how to engage, develop confidence that they can make a difference. Mm-hmm. I think where both of them have limitations, and it doesn't mean that they're weak or poor organizations, it's just a change in my thinking, is that it's hard to build systemic change with those models. That they're hard to scale up. And they don't build social movements in the way that sort of really drives politics and forces politicians to take action. Or at least it's hard for them to do that. What's sort of shaped my thinking about that is that both are important. I think when I sort of really got involved with sort of civic activities, I sort of had this idea that, if you bring people together, give them an opportunity to do good work, so the good work will stand on its own and shine.
Right.
And I'm just, maybe it's just be naive, and what I'm saying now seems really sort of obvious, but you need organizations to do the day-to-day, week-to-week, year-to-year politics, to stay engaged over a period of time, not come and go as issues are sort of ebb and flow.
Right.
You have to raise resources, and you have to have sustained communications. To have lasting change, to have real influence, those things are important too. So please hear that I think City Club and Healthy Democracy are great organizations doing great things. They need to be a part of a larger system where there's more
a bigger ecosystem in there. Yeah. When you said that, it kind of reminded me, I remember when I first was into politics, that when you got an endorsement from a certain X organization, it's like, hey, I got this endorsement, and it meant something. It's like, whether it was City Club or whatever it was, whatever organization it was, just using that as an example. And now it seems like it's more the endorsements from insert whatever group it is that has money that can help fundraise and help your campaign. And, it's going to be interesting to see next cycle, not this coming cycle, but the following cycle, what campaign finance reform has done,
Sure.
and what we'll do for elections. Because I know there's the divide, the business community and the unions.
Sure.
That is a strong divide, and there was kind of an uneven playing field. And when I was leader, we pushed that, and I got a lot of pushback from some of my Republican friends, and even the Democrats were not happy about it. But I think if you get a lot of this big money out of the politics, I think it evens the playing field, and it makes organizations like that more influential in turning around and getting, hey, I need this endorsement, and people look at that if the public's paying attention.
Right. I'm quite ambivalent about campaign finance reform from where I sit as a public opinion researcher. And I'd be curious to hear your reaction to this. Like, if you look at, I live in Portland, and we do a lot of work in the Portland metro area, of course, because we're the big population center is. Right. Portland and Multnomah County, particularly Multnomah County, have put really tight restrictions on campaign spending for local elections. And of course, if we ask Oregonians or Portlanders, do you think too much money is spent on campaigns or too little? They'll say way too much. But there's a downside. Like, there's a downside to limiting the amount of money that can be spent. It is really difficult to keep people's attention, to educate people about issues, to make them even aware that elections are happening.
No, true.
That takes money. And I'm not sure where the balance is. Maybe we've struck it. But there, as much as Oregonians will say that there's too much money in politics and mean it, they are not well informed about elections and the candidates for office and the issues in which candidate is, arguing for one thing or the other. There's lots of reasons for that, but part of the reason in some places, I'd call it Multnomah County in particular, is because there's just so little dollars being able to be spent on those elections, and at least people uninformed.
Yeah, it's a fair point. But I do, the model of what we did is more towards like what's in line with the federal elections, and to the point where you had business and unions sitting at the same table. Like, this is where we're at because they were faced with the ballot ballot measure. But if you look at using the federal guidelines, and you look at former Congresswoman Lori Chavez Dreamer and now Congresswoman Bynum, there's a lot of money spent in there, a lot of money, but they still had the same restrictions. But then you had people coming in, they call it the dark money, but it's the PACs. Those are the PACs that are out there.
These are well-known things. If you limit the amount of money that candidates can raise and spend, you're not necessarily limiting the amount of money that's being spent on politics.
Right? Yeah, it's there. So, what's the biggest lesson you've learned from all the polling you've done that you can tell me as a leader sitting here and what Oregonians want to hear, what they want us to do as leaders? What's the biggest thing? Because you've done a lot of polling, you've heard a lot of things, and maybe never that direct question, but you've touched on a lot of those issues. What's one of the takeaways for me?
One is to sort of pick up on what we were just saying. This is not unique to Oregonians, but folks don't know how everyday public policy is made. There was a time in my life where I thought we really could do a lot to move that forward and educate the people so they make good decisions. We can do that at the margins a little bit, but that's really hard. That said, I think Oregonians are pretty clear, collectively, but then individually, what they value and can make smart decisions when they're provided choices. And so, like, from both a policy perspective and an electoral politics perspective, like, I have some wish that we could have these intellectual conversations about the nuances of policy.
Right.
But the truth is that being able to clearly articulate, forcefully articulate the values you're presenting on the questions of the day, that's what's most important to folks. Give people confidence that you're on their side. You understand the concerns that they have, that you can reflect their values back to them, gain their trust. Then you're going to have a lot of room to make decisions about the specifics of policy if you're able to do that. There are I think probably more on the Democratic side, the sort of the tinkerers that really sort of want to talk about all the particulars of public policy. And I think that's something I've learned. That's just really hard. Talking clearly about values, concerns, priorities, gaining their trust through that. If you can do that, then I think they'll give you some space to make good choices when you're in leadership.
Yeah, I think that's true. And I think people just want us to make decisions, right? We elected you to go make good decisions. And I know that I'm not going to sit here and make everybody happy all day long. If I can get to 51%, I'm doing pretty good, right? Because everybody's got a different opinion. But I think this last election cycle taught me, running those elections and being, in the middle of that as leader, this last time it wasn't about guns and abortion, unlike it was in 2018, where it was guns and abortion, and you had Kavanaugh and you had all that stuff going on, and just getting beat up on those things. Like, man, but this one was about the policies, about homelessness, about crime, and about drugs and stuff like that.
To circle back, just like I want to say this in a way that doesn't turn people off. So I'm going to try to be careful with my words. But if we ask Oregonians to list all the things that are important to them, guns and abortion are not at the top of the list.
It seems like it sure is on campaign season, though.
And the reason is in the campaign season is because it's really clear who voters trust on those issues, like particularly abortion.
Right. And
so even though abortion might not be the most important thing, say homelessness is the most important thing, if you're a Democrat running for office, it's really in your interest to make the election about abortion, because it's really clear who Oregonians trust more on that issue. So as I was saying earlier, it's sometimes less about the designing of the particular policy in a way that's going to be attractive to voters, but being able to force the elections to be about a particular thing.
Issue, yeah. In your presentation you gave a couple weeks ago, you talked about where people trust voters with Democrats in the legislature, and then the Republicans. What was that breakdown? Just you don't have to give the
right. So we asked about, I don't know, 15 or so different issues, and I chose the issues to ask about, but there are things you would expect, abortion and healthcare and jobs and homelessness and guns and taxes, all those sorts of things. On the whole, of the 15 or so things we included, there were 3 things that they trusted Republicans more on, voters trusted Republicans more on, taxes, government spending, managing the budget, things like that. And then everything else was Democrats, which makes sense. So Oregon, there's more Democrats than there are Republicans. There's a reason that they're Democrats. They trust them more. The thing that sort of stands out to me about that, and I think this is a real challenge for Republicans in Oregon, is that issues of like DEI, transgender issues, those are issues that probably play well to Republicans or to voters in general in some parts of the country. And I think we saw that in the 2024 election. That didn't play here because the election wasn't competitive here, but sort of the most famous ad of that campaign, I think, was Donald Trump's "She's for they, them, I'm for you," or the tagline, something like that. And I think that nationally, I don't think it was the most important thing. I think it was immigration and the economy that really sort of was the decisive factor in that election. But like that issue probably played to Republicans nationally. But here in Oregon, Oregonians tell us it's not a very important issue, and to the extent that it is, they trust Democrats more. And so Republicans in Oregon oftentimes get harmed by, the issues that maybe play well for the Republican Party nationally. When they're elevated or made salient in Oregon, they happen to be on issues that in this state, Democrats or voters tend to trust Democrats more. And those are 2 that stand out to me.
Yeah. In your research, since motor voter has come up and then DMV had their little hiccup a couple times, right, and all that, but with the non-affiliated voters, where does that sit in the spectrum? Because I know there's a divide. There's more Democrats than Republicans, but where do you think that voter swings, that non-affiliated and that independent voter swings?
Right. So if you take any number of issues, whether it's a policy issue or just is the state heading in the right direction or the wrong track, non-affiliated voters almost always fall in between. Democrats and Republicans. Sometimes they lean one way more than another. If you think things like trust in government, they're going to be more like Republicans. If it's say like abortion, it's going to be more like a Democrat. It's harder and harder to say what non-affiliated voters are or think about, because that group of voters they're becoming non-affiliated because of the mechanics of how we register people to vote. Right? With automatic voter registration, people are just becoming non-affiliated because that's the way they're interacting with the system for the first time. And so a lot of these non-affiliated voters, maybe they're natural Democrats, Republicans. In a pre-motor voter world, they would have registered with one party or the other. So it makes it more challenging. But demographically, what's true about non-affiliated voters is that they tend to be young, because if you're getting registered for the first time, you're going to likely go through motor voter, and you're going to be non-affiliated. Young people are also saying that they're independent more than older generations. So they're young and they're more racially diverse. And if either party wants to grab those non-affiliated voters and hold on to them, they have to reckon with those demographic profiles.
All right.
Yeah.
John, thanks for being on the show. I appreciate it.
Yeah.
Back to Basics Army, we heard from John Horvick from DHM Research, and you know what people want is the basics, solving the homeless problem, getting housing affordable, safe streets, and the economy. So that's what we're going to try to deliver from the Back to Basics Army to you guys. Till next time, buckle up. We'll get ready for another one.